So what I'd like to do now is, that's new, is to, Deborah, can we please ask you to introduce yourself and just tell us about yourself a little bit, and then get stuck in and take us through what you have to share with us.
Okay. Well, thank you, Stefan, and thank you for that beautiful prayer, Terry, and Chris remotely who wrote it. Yes, I'm a lifelong Green Christian, not in the sense of having belonged to the organisation, because it didn't exist when I was born, but ever since a very, very small child, I have been absolutely passionately in love with the natural world. And so when I discovered there was this organisation called Christian Ecology Link, somewhere over 25 years ago, a neighbour dropped a leaflet around to me saying, I think you might be interested. I was absolutely delighted. And then, you know, with children and, you know, busy life, I didn't actually get to retreat till 2006, I think it was. And then I felt I'd come home. I felt that this was where I needed to be, and where I could find people who I wasn't being apologetic in church for being interested in green issues, and I wasn't being apologetic to green people for being a Christian. I was with people who really got it. And I understood at that point that it's really a calling for all of us, but not everybody has understood it. So I've been a member for over 25 years. I have 3 grown-up children. My husband's a vicar and I live in central Bristol. And I love gardening. My husband also does. He loves growing flowers and I love growing things to eat. We have 2 dogs. I love music and I love reading and writing. So that's me in a nutshell. So shall I just talk about this huge topic this evening? About 3 years ago, some of us on the board of Green Christian Trustees began a conversation about climate grief, distress and eco-anxiety, recognising that this is a growing issue and that it's not going away. We ourselves on the board are not immune to it, and it's important to note that grief, anxiety, distress, whatever you want to call it, are sane and rational responses to what's been described as a wicked problem. That's a technical term. In other words, the issues of climate change and ecological destruction have multiple, complex and interlinked causes, which not only affect each other, often enhancing each other's effects, but increasing in complexity as time goes on. There's no one solution, no easy answer, and no miracle cure. Here's another technical term. Wicked problems need clumsy solutions. Any solutions will be partial, may not be effective on their own, may need to work alongside and interconnect with countless other solutions to have an effect, and we still may not get there. It's so complex. No one person has an overview of the whole thing. During the last ice age, the world's temperature stood at around 4 degrees centigrade colder than today. 12 degrees, global average, rather than 16 today, roughly. And at that time, there was 3 kilometres of ice over the British Isles. We've seen approximately a degree of temperature rise in the last 150 years, with concomitant and increasing climate chaos, and many are predicting another 2 or 3 degrees of increased temperature by the end of the century. We desperately need to stop this or slow it down, but the reality is we are unlikely to do enough quickly enough, and people are beginning to realise this and to react emotionally. 30 or 40 years ago, many of us believed that the more people understood about these crises, the more facts they were given, the more they would act to change their lifestyles, they would campaign, write letters, stop big companies from polluting, get governments to act meaningfully, and so on. The reality is that we not only produce more greenhouse gases than 40 years ago, there is a time lag. The effects of global warming today are the product of greenhouse gases from 40 years ago. So, as a planet, we're in a worse state than we were 40 years ago. It's completely sane and rational to have complicated emotional responses towards this. Believe me, I know. I've been there. I have the t-shirt, as they say. and I've written extensively about it. And it's also important to say that it's not denying our faith to be feeling bad. We don't have to feel upbeat about every shock that comes along, every bad thing that happens. We wouldn't be simplistic if our best friend was murdered. We wouldn't say that everything's fine, that we trust in God to sort out all the issues, and so we don't need to feel any shock, anger, despair, blame, grief, or any other emotion. And many of us do feel that our best friend is being murdered, planet Earth, which nourishes and sustains us and countless billions of other life forms. So yes, we can feel all these so-called negative emotions. They're doing a job. In other words, these so-called negative emotions are sane and rational responses to events outside our control, and that's okay. If we look at the Bible, particularly in the Old Testament, we see many instances of lament and grief and distress and anxiety, and people laid these issues before God in an open and honest way, not expecting a magic solution to their problems, but saying, "Here I am, Lord, in this state, here I am." Look at the Psalms, for example, which I often find enormously comforting. What's not fine is if we become stuck at one stage and are unable to move out of it. Say we're stuck in anger or depression or blame, and we become crippled by this intense emotion. We all need help in processing these almost unprocessable emotions, which is why the Borrowed Time project came about. Borrowed Time is actually the umbrella name for two separate projects, and there may be more in the future. Deep Waters, which I'm going to talk to you about this evening, and Cloud and Fire. Cloud and Fire is more theological, asking deep questions of faith and God. It's still in development and we expect it to be available sometime in the next few months. Deep Waters has a different emphasis. We like to call it a shared journey, which you take in company with others. It's not designed to be done alone. Deep Waters takes place over 8 sessions. Week by week, people receive a handout ahead of each week's gathering, 3 or 4 days ahead. It consists of a reflective piece of writing, some scripture, images, poetry, links to other articles or poems or music. And there's also a suggested activity for people to do by themselves. Then in the shared session, we begin with greetings and prayer before going into the same breakout group every week. And that's really important. So there's an intimacy and a growing sense of support and friendship as people get to know each other. I should say here that it's suitable not just for Zoom, but also for real life. When we get back to those real life groups, it'll be great. And in that small group, people discuss a couple of questions for around 40 minutes, and then we all meet up again together for a final feedback, plus a shared meditation and a final blessing. So our main resources are each other and our shared emotional experiences and reactions, as well as the patterns and structure of each session, which will hold us as it becomes familiar to us. It's a kind of safe place to be. And then, of course, the resources in the handout. This is about exploring new terrain in company with each other. Deep Waters is not just another course, nor is it a campaign or an educational resource. I think it's safe to say it's unlike most other resources produced for church groups or other groups. The bulk of the work is not in the reading or in the materials in the handout, although those are very important. And it's essential to spend time with those, but in the shared explorations and discussions together before God. Here I am, Lord. Here I am. So our complicated emotional response to climate change and ecological destruction is not only rational, but also probably inevitable for most people, unless they remain in a state of denial. And it's further complicated by our knowing so much and what we see happening in the future as well as today. Some people talk about pre-traumatic stress. We are already living in a climate-altered world, which we shouldn't forget, and I'm sure we haven't. I also want to mention here, which I didn't put in my notes, but this is important to remember, is that, of course, our responses in the wealthy West are going to be very different from responses of people in Sudan or Uganda or Pakistan or Bangladesh or countless other countries in the tropics who are already seeing terrible things happening, floods and droughts and hurricanes and all sorts of things. They're just busy trying to survive and get from one year to the next. We have the luxury, cushioned as we are by our wealth, by our long democracy, by our geographical position, by things like our National Health Service and the benefits that we have as in government benefits for people who are out of work and people who are ill. They're cushioned by all of that. We have a kind of luxury of actually looking at this long term rather than the short term, day to day. But with that luxury, I believe, comes some responsibility. But that's a topic for another time. So here are some emotional responses we can expect to see not only in ourselves, but in people around us as people begin to come to terms with what's going on. Disbelief, shock, horror, denial, distress, anxiety, terror or fear, burnout from anxiety, terror, fear, and so on, anger, blame, regret, guilt, depression, despair, bargaining, insomnia, sorrow, grief, confusion, loneliness, sadness, sensations of physical illness, even though nothing can be found wrong, things like palpitations, joy and hope even when something good happens. And that can be complicated because it feels so contradictory. But it's all well and good discussing our emotional responses. That's not all we do in Deep Waters. But it's incredibly important, and it acts as a foundation to what follows. In exploring how to process these powerful feelings, we also find how to reach a point of equilibrium and how to use that as a springboard for moving forward. Our aim is to help people come to a better place by the end of Deep Waters, rather than remaining overwhelmed by the intensity of their complicated feelings about climate change and ecological destruction. One of the things we explore is the multifaceted meaning of hope and what that means for us as Christians. Quite often people urge each other not to lose hope, but it's not very clear what they mean. Is it the kind of hope that's rooted in the idea that God won't let us down, but will come in at the last minute and save us and the planet from ourselves? I've met this when people say they're not at all worried about the climate and ecological crises because God's in charge. And it's not always been possible to unpick what they mean by that. I've also met unwavering hope in a single future technology not yet invented, or one that's still experimental, such as carbon capture and storage. Remember, climate and ecological catastrophe are wicked problems requiring clumsy solutions. So we explore some of this too, as well as what we understand as justice, wisdom, compassion, love, and action. By the end of Deep Waters, we hope that people will have some tools to enable them to move forward more confidently. And the idea is also that you can build on what you've learned, and you can build on the friendships too. many of the groups who've taken part over the last few months have actually continued meeting from time to time. So who is Deep Waters for? It's for anyone who feels the remotest sense of anxiety or distress about climate and ecology on planet Earth. It may be something that they experience constantly, just about holding themselves together, or it may be something they're suppressing because of their other obligations, perhaps shoving it right down inside and having it jump up and bite them when they hear a news item or watch a David Attenborough documentary. People who feel no anxiety at all and believe that these problems are solvable in the next 20 years or so won't appreciate Deep Waters. Deep Waters won't be for them. It's also important to say that although we welcome anybody, it does have a Christian bias. And that's important for everyone to know. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share a file. I'm just wondering where I can share. There we go, share screen. I'm going to share. Can you all see that? Is everyone nodding? Good, lovely. So this is a PDF. This is the introduction, the first week out of the 8. So this is what everybody gets the first time. And it explains that little sentence there, the middle sentence, an 8-week journey of guided reflections and discussion, exploring climate grief and eco-anxiety, including love, grief, truth, lament, wisdom, justice, and hope. So it's a little encapsulated sentence. I'm actually going to just bring this down so you can see it a bit better. There you go. And on the front of every that I believe is in Italy. I think it's a reservoir created for water, and that church was flooded. Well, the whole village was flooded. So that's the first page. People have been very moved by the Lord of the Rings quotation. If you don't know it, it doesn't matter, but it says a lot. I wish it need not have happened in my time, said Frodo. Don't we all wish that? So do I, said Gandalf, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us. And in many ways, that kind of thought keeps me going. I can't solve the problems of the world, but I can do what I can in my own small place. So this is taken from the website. This is a hard time to hope. It can be hard to know what hope is now. We talk about being in a time between worlds, which demands new skills and new ways with words. We need leaders of mourning, pioneers of courageous unknowing. We don't know what the future holds, but we have to be very courageous. Paradigm shifters of hope. What does hope mean? We may feel ill-equipped to face the future, but we are the ones called to be alive for today. We know that things will get worse, but not by how much or how quickly. With a small group of people we trust, we can find courage to share feelings in which we thought we were alone. Their gentle questions will give us permission to say what previously could not be said. Their affirmative reactions will reassure us. The sky will not fall in if we take that first step in confidence. And this is what people have found. Quite often, people who have come to Deep Waters have been surrounded by members of their families or their friends where they can't really talk about how bad they feel about everything. It's one of those things we don't really talk about at the moment. I think we will as a society in the future, but at the moment we're not, because people just don't know how to handle this kind of thing. It's such a huge, huge thing, an existential crisis, really. Over 8 weeks, we will intentionally explore our emotional response to climate and ecological catastrophe and explore some possible foundations for courageous hope and action. We will consider what it means to be adaptive to new realities and to be shapers of new patterns of understanding and living. This is a journey rather than a course, an expedition into emotional areas we don't usually have the opportunity to explore. We will accompany each other and help each other along the way, forging understanding, support, and renewed purpose. And this is what we found, that this does happen, which is really wonderful. Kate Marvel says, the opposite of hope is not despair, it is grief. We need courage, not hope. Courage is the resolve to do well without the assurance of a happy ending. There may be a happy ending one day, but probably we won't be around to see it. And we just have to keep going. So I've already said it's not a course or a campaign. And we do say to people, if they decide it's not for them, it's fine. We won't pursue anybody. And then in the first session, we get to know each other a little bit. And this explains something I've said already to you before: reading, reflecting on preparatory materials, listening to people. There's some general guidelines about how to be in this kind of breakout group. And we've asked people not to share the materials with anybody else. It's very sensitive stuff. So the 8 sessions as the introduction, which I'm showing you today. Then we talk about the stages or phases of climate grief. And probably you're most familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5-stage model of grief. Well, that was developed in the 1960s in response to people who were terminally ill. So it was their response to grief. Sorry, not climate grief, but their response to their imminent death. And not necessarily appropriate for people who are accompanying them on that journey. So we've looked further, and there are many more models of grief now. And we've taken some of the best of it and explained what's going on, and it's much more complex. And what's interesting is you can bounce around between different forms of different emotions within this whole process. So you might be stuck in anger for ages, and then you might move to blame, and then you might move to regret, and then you might go back to blame and then regret again. You could be bouncing around. Third session is helping each other tell the truth, how important truth-telling is in this journey. Then we talk about lament and how to lament. And that's a group activity always in the Bible. Or not always. Occasionally, you'll see something like David lamenting something, but generally, it's best done together as a people, as the people of God. Befriending mortality, considering extinction. Wisdom and love, or compassion. The place of blame, forgiveness and justice. And redefining hope, what hope means. And as I said, some people aren't terribly clear what they mean by hope. And we try and really tease out all the threads that there are within that. So the resources and patterns are each other, the structure to each session, our emotions and reflections, the materials for each session, our surroundings and our context, all coming from different places. The perspectives of borrowed time. There is a borrowed time website. You can access it from the Green Christian website. A spirituality that recognizes that the challenge is more than economic, political, scientific, or technological. It's a spiritual crisis as much as anything. And then our thinking and reflecting between sessions. And we recommend the use of a journal. So that's the pattern. It's a 90-minute thing. I won't go through that. So the first session, we're talking about love. We grieve only what we love. So we start our journey with love. Everything's been created out of love. God is love. And I won't go into all of this now because I think people might want to have a bit of a chat. But in the last paragraph there, we say this desire to dominate and exploit, rather than being something that Christianity says is wrong about human beings, is actually part of the human condition. A desire to overreach ourselves and a perceived need to take control. So there's been a lot of blame laid at Christianity's door for ecological destruction, but in fact, it is just the human condition. And then these are some of the beautiful images that we use. We use images every week. And then going from that huge, wonderful landscape there, a mountain and a lake, down to this, the glory of creation. I've no idea how big that beetle is, but it's probably quite small. And then we also look at more difficult images. This is clear-felled forest. And a little bit more of the talk, not the talk, the article, which we won't look at now. Some quotations quite often are there, and links. Ecological grief, I mourn the loss of nature. It saved me from addiction. And that was from The Guardian 2 years ago, I think. And then scripture, and this is 2 pages of Psalm 104, so I will whiz through that, but we always put some scripture in. Really grounds us, I think. And then poetry. We've had difficulty, we found it was going to be too difficult to get permissions. But this is lovely because you get the poem if you follow the link, then you can hear it read. And if you follow the link, the poem is literally a circle, a globe, which is rather lovely. Pied Beauty, we could use this because it's out of copyright. Gerald Manley Hopkins. I expect lots of people know that. And then a lovely one from Wendell Berry, and again that's read on a YouTube video. Music and video there from Stephen Foe. And then a suggested activity that you do alone. It's different every week. Sometimes we suggest people go for a walk. Sometimes we suggest that you sit with a candle or with some water, leaves perhaps. And then discussion in small groups. And then we signal what's coming the following week. So there's a lot there, and it's designed so that not only can it be done both in real life and on Zoom, and it can be, but it's also designed because we are all different and we all respond to different kinds of things. Some people are very visual and the images will mean a lot to them, a lot more to them than, say, a poem. So it's there to give as much as possible to people, and they will take what they need from it. And of course, people can hang on to these materials forevermore, but not share them. We have plans, by the way, to make it available publicly in the autumn. So watch this space. So I'm going to leave it there. And I don't think I've got a real question for you in the breakout groups, but just maybe to say, how do you respond to that? And would it be something that you would enjoy, do you think, or find helpful, or whether you would recommend it to somebody else? Can you think of people you might feel would benefit from that kind of thing? So I'll leave it there. Thank you, Stefan.
Great. So with Barbara's control, we can send us all out to breakout groups, those who want to. Very good. So I guess we're now in the point where we'd like to reflect and talk about some of the things that we've heard about. If I can get the ball rolling, Deborah, it would be very good to hear, if I want to participate in this, how do I do it?
Yes, we have, unfortunately, I've just discovered the link is broken today, or it doesn't exist at the moment, but we have a way of signing up on the website, on the Green Christian website, and that will get repaired probably next week, actually. So if you can hang on, and then you'll find. Otherwise, no, I don't think you can get to it from the website at the moment. Yes, that would be the way to do it. Or from the autumn, we are hoping very much to have it accessible to churches with quite a number of checks and balances to make sure that people really understand they're going into very deep, sensitive stuff, that it's not just any old course and they can just do session 2 and session 7 if they feel like it. But it's a journey that people undertake together, and they start at the beginning and they go through to the end. You know how sometimes if you've got Bible study materials, you just pick and choose.
Brilliant.
So it's not quite like that.
So, but if people want to join the current thing that's just starting now, then then let us know, and there's still spaces to get
Yes.
you in on
Well,
the thing.
okay, there are one or two spaces.
Okay, there's.
I would suggest that if lots of people, I would suggest, first of all, write to me at Deborah Tomkins at greenchristian.org.uk. Sorry, let's get that right. I'll get it in the chat. If you're really keen to start this time, if there's more than 2 or 3 people, I will suggest that you wait till the autumn, because I don't think we could fit more than 2 or 3 people in. But if it's, if there's 12 of you, then we started off with you lot in the autumn, with a whole load of thanks very much, Barbara.
Can I just say, Deborah, that if you type in deep water in the search on Green Christian, you'll get to the deep waters page, and the link on there, and the link on that does work.
Great, that's fantastic. Good, thank you very much. I didn't see who was speaking. I'm just sort of looking. Thank you very much. Oh, there you are, Paul. Yeah, so the link works from the search bar, but doesn't from the page I was expecting it to be on. But we'll sort that out. So yeah, write to me. And if you'd like to join, we'll see how many there are, and I'll let you know. So it's tomorrow evening. So we've already done the introductory session, which I've shown you, and I would send you that PDF. And then tomorrow evening, it starts. It's at 7 o'clock, 7 to 8:30, and I would have to send you the PDF tonight, so that you have a little bit of time to look at it. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff in there, and it's really worth looking at. So not going in without having read it. So if that's all right with you, we'll just have to play it by ear a little bit.
So let's open it up. Any thoughts and feedbacks from anyone? Stick your hand up or just speak. We only got one screen full, so we can be a bit more flexible. Go for it, Anne.
I'm wondering how very distinct. I mean, I can very much see that it's a Christian course. Could one conceivably deal with eco-anxiety if you weren't Christian? I mean, what on earth are the resources that could help you see the bigger picture if you weren't a Christian, or if you had no spiritual base? Maybe that's a broader.
It's very interesting. I've come across. Well, I actually joined the Climate Psychology Alliance. Not that I'm a psychologist, but because they're doing this kind of work in a secular way, and it's very interesting. They offer up to 3 sessions of free therapy sessions. Gosh, it's a tongue twister. 3 free therapy sessions per person if you contact them through their website. A lot of them aren't. I don't have a spiritual background, but quite a number of them have a Buddhist background, I've noticed. I don't know. I think I've drawn quite a lot. We have drawn quite a lot of stuff, of information from them, in a sense, not from them exactly, but from the psychological insights that we've gained in the latter part of the 20th century and this century about what trauma does to people and what anxiety does to people, and distress and grief and so on. So we've drawn on that. So they have a lot of wisdom, but not necessarily with the overarching understanding that this is a spiritual problem. Hubris, serving mammon and not God, and all those other things that we understand because of our Christian heritage. So yeah, there are people out there, but it's a different kind of journey, slightly different journey.
Thank you.
I think they're very good, actually. No, I know some of them in my local area.
Some people say that hope is my enemy in climate change because it makes me complacent to taking action. What do you say about that, Deborah?
Well, I think I mentioned that hope is a bit of a complex beast, really. It can mean that kind of pie in the sky, it'll all be all right in the end kind of hope. But that's just sort of quite a shallow kind of optimism. you know, that we will solve it or whatever. But there's another kind of hope, a deeper hope in God and what God might be saying to us through all of this. And so that's the kind of thing we explore. And maybe God is saying, you know, I've been telling you for a long time, you're just overreaching yourselves. You know, you can't do this. You know, look what all the prophets said. And so, yeah, we explore a lot of different things. And there's probably a kind of different kind of hope, because people use the word hope in all sorts of contexts. I hope it'll be nice tomorrow. You know, I hope it won't rain on Saturday. And that's a very tiny use of the word hope. But hope can be deeper and stronger and wider and broader, like love. Love has so many different meanings. So
Debbie.
we explore it.
Debbie.
I like what St. Paul says about suffering produces character, endurance, and then character, and character produces hope, and hope does not disappoint us. Yeah. So that it's actually the fruit of suffering, and it's honed in a particular way. Yes. I found that very helpful.
Yes, it is really helpful. And one of our colleagues in Borrowed Time talks about hope being a virtue as well. So it's not it's good to have hope, but the wrong kind of hope, the kind of blind optimism that science will solve everything, well, you know, it depends what people mean by hope, and you have to really unpick it.
I think hope's a discipline.
Yes. Yeah. So I still have hope, but it's moderated.
It was our reading this morning, wasn't it?
Terry.
I read not long ago about hope, which helped me. It said it's not just something we think about or hope for, it's got to be lived out within us. So our life, our living of life in reality has got to show that hope.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this is just a, you know, beginning to show us the complexity of what we're trying to talk about. You know, living hope in action.
Yes.
Is action in hope, or something. Hope and action together.
Sally has a hand up.
This is just a question about how the course runs. And so I was wondering, when you go into the breakout rooms, I see it's for quite a long time. Is there somebody leading that? Because presumably the success of the course is on how well the groups gel together. Partly.
Yes, we have a facilitator who's done the course actually in every group. So they're very familiar with the materials, they're familiar with how it works. And I think that's really very important, actually. So it's a steady pair of hands. And
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to reaffirm that really is so important. It's important, I think, with any, you know, long group like that you need to have a facilitator there, however gently. And it's a facilitator who's also joining in as a participant, but nevertheless, you need somebody who's just guiding and who knows how to just help people to contribute. And in the case of this course, Deep Waters, to be sensitive to the different emotions that can be raised by some of the material and thoughts that we're thinking about. So yeah, that's a really important question. It's a really important thing that we've got there.
It is. And we do encourage, well, our facilitators, as Barbara just said, take part in this as well. They're reading it again as if it's for the first time also. Even though they're familiar with it, they're reading the poetry again and looking at the links and so on. And each time you will come up, it's like when you read a book, a favourite book, you see new things each time. And God speaks to us differently each time as well. And it also depends who's in your group. So what is amazing is when we have the discussions after the breakout, the 40 minutes breakout, is that people have been discussing the same questions, but each discussion has been entirely different. And it's absolutely fascinating when we come back together and say, well, what did you discuss? What did you talk about? And they've come back with completely different conversations. It's amazing. And it's I think it's what's needed for those people in those groups. And that's why we keep them very small as well, 4 or 5 people.
So you have to cope with fear. You have to cope with anger. Sometimes, you know, a lot of activists are really angry about things.
Really angry. I agree with you. They are.
And that's really damaging. And yet then we've got the love of God, and we've got to, well, I tell you what, we all want to go, I think. And I think we've really built the appetite for this. And now we just need to book another one in, I think. It's really good. Any more thoughts?
Very welcome, yeah.
Any more thoughts there?
I'll tell you something while you're all thinking. It's really helped me. I was one of the main authors of this. I talked about it a lot with Paul Bodnam, who most of you, probably many of you know, and previous chair of Green Christian. And he and I had many, many discussions and talked about it. And of course, there's the wider Borrowed Time team, who are sort of, you know, we have monthly meetings where we see where we're going and we try and discern what's needed. And it's really helped me just by writing it and putting it together and discussing it with people as I put it together, really helped me work out where my hope is, and to leave a lot of that distress in a place where I know it's still there. I'm still distressed about a lot of it, but I can handle it now. And there was a time a few years ago where I couldn't. I was very, very depressed and very anxious.
And we've all met people who are angry. I just have a vivid recollection of going to the shop, and the lady at the shop was basically there trying to serve us and was in tears. And I said, "What's the matter, my dear?" She said, "I'm just so worried about the climate." And I'm thinking, how can I help you? So I'll be really interested, Deborah, can you put, you talked about your journey. Can you give us the essence, or are we cheating and asking you for answers before we've been through the journey ourselves?
The essence of what? Sorry, Stefan. The essence of deep waters.
No, the essence of what your sort of journey has been. You talked about your journey from sort of anxiety.
Well, actually, there was so this was a few years ago, and maybe 6-7 years ago, and I remember saying to God, right, that's it. I have had enough. I'm not doing any more green stuff. I'm sick of it. All it does is give me grief, literally. I'm so upset. I want to be like everybody else down the road, and they fly off to wherever, Switzerland on holiday, and they do their token recycling, and they think that's enough. I just don't want to think about it anymore. So I did. I stopped for a bit, and I had them then. It was a bit like Jonah sitting under the vine. I had the most miserable 3 months of my life. I felt terrible. And in the end, I said to God, okay, you've won. I'm coming back. And then it lifted. It lifted. So he won. And at that point, I thought, well, okay. And actually, not long after that, I was asked if I would be a trustee. And so I said yes. And now I'm co-chair. So this is part of my journey, the calling of it, because so that was very important to me, but I was still very distressed at the time. But actually, I think realizing that other people felt as bad as I did was a huge step. Once I realized that they weren't just being activists and getting out there and being cheerful and yes, we've joined Friends of the Earth and we'll change the planet, change the government, and it wasn't working. And that was the thing that was really, very, very hard. It is very hard, isn't it? Watching all this not working, doesn't work, hasn't worked. And that's way before Extinction Rebellion or Christian Climate Action, who really got people to sit up and take notice, which was their aim. So I just felt really, it was knowing that other people felt distress. And Paul and I had this conversation probably 3 years ago. And it was just knowing that we both felt real deep distress and we needed to do something about it. And from then on, and exploring what it means to be in eco distress and ways out of it and where God is in it. And so Paul's working on this other project, which is more deeply theological. This is much more practical. This is a kind of church group project. And his is more for probably for theologians and for theological students and for clergy and church leaders and that kind of thing. But not exclusively. People will be able to join that too.
What's his thing called?
His thing is called Cloud and Fire, with lovely imagery of being led through the desert. So yeah, we've got these two things that are he's taking the lead on one and I've taken the lead on the other, and but they serve different purposes. I would love to see a youth something for young people in churches as well. And of course, I wouldn't ever want to say to anyone who's not a Christian, you can't come. But they do need to know that it has a very strong Christian emphasis. And that's important to know.
Great. Well, is there any sort of last comment, question or thought that people would like to put in before we close the session today?
Well, let me take up what Deborah is saying about young people, because I run forest school and I'm aware of a really radical shift in the way that the sort of things that we try and share with children, the kind of what we're asking them to encourage. They're planting trees and growing things and all the time looking at nature and making that connection. And it's simply amazing. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And so they have to be outside in the woods to be doing this. And that has to be part of the answer.
Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you. And so many children are divorced from it, and adults too. And any of you who've been to Ringsfield Hall, where we've often held a Green Christian retreat, Chris Walton, who was our former chaplain, was the director of Ringsfield Hall, and he had some astonishing stories of people. It's an eco study centre in Suffolk, and astonishing stories of people, adults, teachers accompanying school groups who came for residential weeks, who had their lives transformed, and they didn't realise how wonderful nature was. And so he's got some wonderful stories. Too many people are too cut off from it. I completely agree with you, Anne. Yeah, that's part of the answer, I'm sure of it.
In fact, we've got a new set of podcasts done by Chris Walton, which are going up on our website imminently, where he's talking about what you're talking about, Anne, how reconnecting children with nature and the spirituality of that. So watch out, you will have it announced in an e-news or C-Link, and when it does, click on those podcasts and listen to them. He's very, he's deeply into this.
Yeah. It's lifelong, isn't it?
And with that final thing, I think we should now draw things to a close.